Well, good morning. We're here at the warehouse today. Got a call a few days ago from a lady that stated she had something that her brother-in-law had made back in the 50s and wanted to know if we were interested in it. So spoke to the lady a little bit. It's not an arcade game, but I was really interested in it. I mean, it sounded very intriguing, and we went over, picked it up, and sure enough, yeah, it's pretty neat. And so we managed to make a deal on the machine, and I picked it up and brought it back. And so I have no idea. It's a cool machine. It's cool. I know what it is, but I don't know how it works. I thought I had some ideas how it worked, but then when I opened it up the other day when we first looking at it, it's really different. It's really unique. So yeah, let me show you what we got. It's pretty neat. All right, so let's turn it around here. This was the plaque that came on it. Designed and built by Mr. Spear and Mr. Gioia, I guess, of Lockport, New York in 1954. Obviously, this panel was made after, at some point after, because they're talking about how it was all original. Yeah, so it's a Tic Tac Toe machine made in 1954. Now, I've played with it a little bit and saw how it works. Well, or not necessarily seen how it works because I ain't figured that out yet. That's something we're going to figure out together. But the other day I had this panel off here and was able to see behind it, which surprised me with what I saw. But we'll show that here in a little bit. But so it's basically two boxes. So it's a display box. The red is the display and keyboard, if you will. And the big box is the actual computer. So let me show you how it works. There's a power switch on the side over here. We got that turned on. And then we come over here and there are two control buttons. There is this button tells the computer to go for it. This button is a reset, and each one of these corresponds with the correct number squared. So what we're going to do is we're going to press the button first. We're going to let the computer go first. We hit that button and we hear it clicking. And this is what it's doing. So it goes around and it's happy. And it stops and says, hey, I'm there. Okay. So now it's my turn. Well, I'm going to select button number. And it selected to play in the top left square. Well, I'm going to play in the center square because I want the center square. And my light turns green. And then I tell the computer by pressing this button, I tell the computer, okay, it's your turn. And away it goes again. Each time it makes one full circle all the way around. Well, so now, in order for me to make sure that the computer doesn't win the game, well, actually, I'm going to let the computer win the game. I am going to take number 7, position number 7 here, which if I do that and press this button and tell it that it can go ahead, he should take position number 3, and it does, which now forces me, well, I'm pretty much right, so now I'm going to lose. I got to pick 2 or 6. Whichever one I pick, he's going to pick the other and win. So let's just pick number 6. Turn it on. We're going to hit the button. Now he should pick number 2. Boom, immediately. Wow, he picked number 2 and it won. The computer, it finishes rolling around this thing and then it's just quit. Now, so I played a few games. This is the first time I let the system win. The one other time we played it all the way through till it was a draw, or as we used to call it, the cat got the game. But the other time I try to let the computer go first, it doesn't like that. There's a couple of weird things. So I'm still trying to figure out how to exactly play the game. But before we get too deep into playing it, we got to figure out how this thing works, because this is really, really fascinating to me. This little dial that goes around, it obviously hits the different contacts. You know, with Tic-Tac-Toe, there's a very limited number of options that it can play anyway. But yeah, so we're going to take the back off, show you that. And then something that I haven't done yet is we're going to take this Lexington plant off, this plexiglass off through these screws. And this is actually hinged. So we should be able to pull this open and look behind it and see what's behind it, because when you're on the other side, you can't. Anyway, so hang on, more stuff. I'm going to get a screwdriver. We're going to open it up and we're going to take a look at it. Well, okay, now this is going to be in a journey now that we're going to take together, and those of you to watch, there are going to be multiple videos, because I'm going to have to stop here after we go through this and figure out what my next steps are. Because, you know, at one point I'm expecting certain relays and switches and things, but this is totally not what I'm finding in there. And I thought, well, you know, maybe it's kind of a simplistic. It is not simplistic at all. So let's go through a couple of things. So first of all, I took the Lexan that was on the front here, took it off. It's down here. It was just screwed on with a bunch of screws. And then there's a small screw here that was tightened up, and I unscrewed it. And this now swivels, as I suspected, for this. So we open this up and we find this. That's a heck of a motor. You know, obviously they just used whatever parts they managed to find. Oh, this will work. Let's put this in there. Because look at this motor. I mean, good Lord, look at the gearing and the setup, and yeah, this thing does a lot more than just make a dial turn. But yeah, so obviously it runs through and it processes each little step. So as it turns, it goes through the steps and says, okay, do this one, then do this one, then do this one, then do this one, you know, and it just runs around till it finds what it wants to do. There's all sorts of hand numbering and things on the inside for them to keep track. But one of the things that the lady did tell me, it was done by engineers, 2 different engineers, and these guys, obviously you can tell they were engineers, because everything's so nicely neat, bundled up, tied in. Everything's consistent all the way around. Very, very well designed. In the back of this, we have a whole row of capacitors. They look like they're different sizes, but again, it could have just been something they had sitting around and they used, or there was specific reasons for it. Probably specific reasons for it, because oh my gosh, let's look at the back of it. Yeah, this isn't what I expected. Let's start with the top rows and work our way down. So these electronic devices of some sort are all through here. Yeah, allied controls, different part numbers, different pieces, SN 14710 770, SN 16160 something. There's a 14782. There's a 12801 maybe, 804 maybe, SN 9840. So all these are different electronic part numbers of some sort. And then we have a battery. What the heck do we need a battery for? But we have a battery. We have a relay. We have a small transformer for that relay with a couple of caps stuck on it and some resistors. There's the one tube that we see. Then we have a bridge, what looks like a bridge rectifier in there. More connectors, resistors, another transformer, some more parts, another Allied control relay. No, that's not a relay. Not sure what it might be. Yeah, that's a relay. And then you have all the connections down here. See, these guys, you can, like I said, you can tell these guys were engineers. Look how neat and well put together this thing was. This wasn't something somebody just threw a bunch of wires together. These guys planned it out, knew what they were doing, knew what was going to work, and then did it properly and did it right and made it work. The main power switch, they fused it all, which is great. Good to know. There's another transformer, which I'm assuming cuts it down for whatever this blue thing is. I don't know what this blue thing is. Somebody's going to tell me, but I don't know what that blue thing is. And then look, there's a Lionel train transformer, and it's set to the top, which according to this it says 6 to 12 stepper, so I'm assuming it's set to 12 volts. So yeah, that's the brains of the matter. And what I suspected was in the back box, the display box, is true. It was what it was. This is where the wires go in, one red and one green. There's your different types of, so because you have to have 9 squares with 2 colors lights each, that's 18 light bulbs on or off, controlled by these. And then underneath you have this section here, these wires here that tie in here. This is your switch controls and goes down there, and there's all the buttons and switches, and there's another light bulb up in there which never lights. I don't know whether the light doesn't work or something. Well, I don't know. And then here is this little box, and I'm like, what the heck is that little box? Well, that little box is a doorbell buzzer that I'm assuming is supposed to buzz for whenever you win a game or when it's your turn or something. But that buzzer I hadn't heard, the light in there I hadn't seen go off. I haven't seen all the logic work quite right. And at this point, I'm going to assume that all the logic works if everything is correct. And it could be that it's not correct because all the capacitors are dried out and no good. The battery, for whatever its purpose for, is not any good. The we do have some corrosion in here that we need to replace that wire, get that cleaned up, and we found some down in here is underneath the where's underneath the fuse as well. There's some sort of garbage in there. We need to get all that cleaned up. But yeah, the fact it works is pretty amazing. But this is not what I was expecting. And so I guess what I'm going to do is stop now, and I'm going to go inside, do some research, find out what some of those part numbers and things are. Then we'll finish up this video and then decide where we go from there and do our second episode to release whenever I figure it out. Okay. As I looked into the history of this game and learned about the origins of the computerized strategy games, what I can tell, this game was groundbreaking in the day with its ability and the size that it had. I'm just amazed at what I'm actually finding out here. So back in 1940 and 41, there were 2 games that were created that could play the game of NIM. I don't know what the game of NIM, N-I-M, was, but it was called the Nimatron and the NIM machine. And those 2 are generally considered the first computerized strategy game created, but they were huge. I mean, we're talking taking up the size of a gymnasium, right? Huge rooms of machines to do this. The Nimron itself was displayed in 1941, as we see here, and you can see how big this thing was. Um, Now, the next time a game playing computer made really an appearance was in 1949 in Great Britain by a gentleman by the name of David Watts. There is a short YouTube video out there showing Mr. Davies playing the game back in 1949. But this machine appears to be relays and stepper unit based, so a very mechanical type of game. But it also seems to set the stage for tic-tac-toe to become the game of choice for early developers of a computer game. I suspect that it was the relative simplicity of the game, and that there is a very common game that most everyone could relate to. In 1950, a gentleman named Joseph Katz made a machine that he then went on to display at the Canadian National Exhibition. This was back when we used to have world fairs all the time. And that it actually played tic-tac-toe. The game was really popular during the show. And this photo is the comedian Danny Kaye is shown having just beaten the game, although they did change the strategy of the game so he could win the game. But you can again see how huge this one game was just to play the thing. Because remember, we're talking about large size things. Now, how do we get this thing down? And in 1952, the Bell Labs companies created a tic-tac-toe game of their own to showcase their relays and switching. But again, it was very short-lived, rather large machine, big, huge mechanical clunking thing. And it was really just a kind of a publicity. Hey, look, this is how fancy our things was. Also in 1952, though, a gentleman by the name of Sandy Douglas, who was working with the EDSAC, EDSAC computer, wrote some software. This was one of the first computers that actually could have stored code. Wrote some software that would play tic-tac-toe. And he is basically credited with having credited with the first real video game. Now, don't confuse that with the first video game that was commercially viable. This was just, hey, here's a video game we've created on this computer. And, you can see in the pictures, very rudimentary. But again, the sheer size of it is just huge. Certainly not available to the masses, and no one could ever fit this in their house, much less on their kitchen table. And this was in 1952. So now, as we look at the timeline, we are in 1953 when these two gentlemen created this tic-tac-toe game that we have here today. And it really wasn't until 1956 that in the December issue of Radio Electronics that a small-scale machine was actually shown that could play tic-tac-toe. This, again, was very similar to what we have, but again, it used mechanical relays and was aptly called relay mo. So again, not really a computer, just a bunch of relays connected together in a logical sequence. After that, it was in 1963. So, another 5, 6, 7 years later, a gentleman by the name of Jeff Maddox stepped up and created a tabletop version of a tic-tac-toe game. Mr. Maddox was a sophomore, junior in high school in Wisconsin, and displayed it there in Wisconsin at one of the school events. And it made a rather big hit. People were really interested in this game. But again, this was also appears to be using As you can see, mechanical relays to operate it. But again, it can sit on the table, and it looks a lot like the game that we have here. So now we have this game. So folks, here's the thing. Here's where I'm at. We know the game works. We know there's some interesting history behind it. It could have some really, really significant history of it, but I really need to understand how it works. So I'm looking for any feedback that I can get for this types of electronic components those are. Obviously, I can't find any information on the allied controlled components that are in there. So if you know anything about those components and how they function or what they are, where I can go and find that information, please post it in the comments. Let me know. So let me go and dig and see if I can't find. In the meantime, I am going to take the next steps of replacing all those capacitors. I'm sure they're bad, and the battery and any of the corroded components, and then see if the game changes the way it operates at that point. So once I get those components done, replace whatever, then we'll come back and we'll have the other video and we'll see where we're at from there. All right, until then, later.